Yes, thank you everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the webinar covering applications to our children and young people in care theme. I'll start with brief housekeeping. We do have the live audio transcript going and the transcript will be available on our website as well. If you can't see it, please do let me know. As I said, we'll also be recording this session, so it will go up on the website. If you're furiously taking notes and you missed something, you'll be able to refer back to it later. You should have received a poll as you came in and hopefully a survey as we finish today, so do try and complete those if you can. The format of the session is that I will give a brief introduction and a brief introduction to the fellowship as a whole. I'll then pass over to two of our fellows, Lorna and Jadwiga, who will give you some information on their fellowship, how they did what they did, and how much they enjoyed it, I hope. Then we'll have some time for questions for them, so you can learn more about the fellowship experience. We'll then pass to Nikesh, who's our fellowship manager, and give a bit of an insight into the applications before a bit of a Q&A for him. As I said, if you do have any questions that come up through the time, please do post them in the Q&A box and I'll put them to all our panelists. And then we'll finish with a bit of information on support and wellbeing from our partners at Coram. So let's start with a brief introduction on the fellowship as a whole. So firstly, thank you very much for your interest in the Church of Fellowship. We are a national network of over 3,800 incredible individuals who are inspiring change all over the UK. We support our fellows to carry out research across the world into new ideas and then to use what they learn to address the challenges we're facing here in the UK. That research can be carried out by our fellows travelling to other countries or by taking time away from their day-to-day lives to immerse themselves in online research while staying in the UK. This year, amongst the wide range of other areas, we're seeking applications that aim to improve the lives of children and young people with experience of care, and we'll be awarding up to 10 fellowships for research in this area. This research could include a focus on children in care, those on the edge of care, adoptees, or care leavers. And we're also welcoming applications that aim to increase support for caregivers and for families affected by care concerns. Our fellows often have relevant lived experience in their research area. And the best people to tell you what it's like to apply for a fellowship and to be a fellow are our fellows themselves. So I'm very happy to introduce you to Lorna and Jadwiga, who will share their experience of being Church of Fellows and what they've used and what they've learned. So if we can start with Lorna, if you're ready. I know you have some slides to share with us.
Thank you everyone for joining. Sorry it's been such a difficult start this afternoon. I'm just going to talk really briefly about my fellowship and hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions. So I'm Lorna Stabler. I am a Churchill Fellow from 2019. It was slightly interrupted because of COVID, but maybe we can talk about that in the questions part. My contact details are on here and I'll come back to those at the end as well if anyone wants them. So my fellowship, I was focused on kinship care. So the issue that I was really trying to address was that kinship care in the UK doesn't necessarily have the same level of support as foster care. For everyone here who doesn't necessarily know what kinship care is, so kinship care is a type of family-based care where a child can't live with their birth family for whatever reason, but rather than going to a non-related foster carer, they can go and live with extended family, whether that's grandparents, brothers and sisters, aunties and uncles, or a friend or a neighbour, for example, which is called private fostering in the UK. However, in the UK, we have a very long history of foster care, which comes with the whole care system, which comes with assessments, comes with social workers, comes with financial support and training. Whereas kinship care, even though it's much wider spread, doesn't necessarily have the same history of being supported by the state as foster care does. So I wanted to look at where in other countries there hasn't been such a long history of foster care, but they were introducing family-based care, how they were bringing in policies, assessments, training for carers that included foster carers and kinship carers together to see if we started from a place of introducing family-based care that included kinship carers from the start if people would do something different. So I travelled to Japan and India. I was then due to travel to Cambodia as well. And then COVID happened. So I'd never quite finished my travels. But I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I've done with the results of my fellowship so far anyway. So I was hoping to achieve lots of things, but mainly what I really wanted to do was influence policy and practice to think about how we promote and assess and support kinship care in a way that's culturally competent. So in a way that actually respects families, their needs, their differences, and where they're coming from, and in a way that's rights-based as well. A lot of the proposals, a lot of the ways that we've supported kinship care in the UK so far is to try and fit it into a fostering system. And I have my own experience of having been a kinship carer and gone through those assessments that didn't feel right when thinking about looking after a family member compared to looking after a stranger's child. So there's lots of different things that I thought we could learn from areas that were doing it differently and had a different idea of what family was and how you care for your family. Hopefully we can have some questions about the actual fellowship, but I was asked to focus a little bit on what I've done with my fellowship, which is the bit that feels a little bit uncomfortable because this is me being like, these are all the great things I've been doing. But just to start off, a lot of the things I've done since my fellowship weren't necessarily directly as a result of the findings of my fellowship, but actually the fellowship gave me the confidence and a little bit more understanding and the connections to go out and do some of this work since I came back to the UK. Obviously, 2019 seems like a long time ago, but 2 years of that was in lockdown. So I'm hoping I'll be able to do a lot more with it as well as I go forward. So I've kind of grouped these things into three main areas. So one of the main things that I've been doing since completing my fellowship, and actually before my fellowship as well, but I've done quite a lot of research focusing on kinship care. So in Wales, I've worked with a local authority who was introducing a new team to give long-term and short-term support to kinship carers and to think really about what that support could look like if it wasn't part of kinship fostering. So if it was outside of the kind of legal fostering support kind of umbrella that most people usually have to rely on to get any kind of support from children's services. I've started a PhD, which specifically focuses on the needs of kinship carers who are older brothers and sisters looking after their younger brothers and sisters, which isn't usually what you hear about when you hear about kinship care, because usually what you hear about is grandparents. So my PhD is really thinking about actually you have these different relationships within families and different caring relationships. One of the things that I found, particularly when I was in India doing my fellowship, that there was quite a big expectation on older sisters to kind of take over the caring role for their younger siblings, particularly when their parents had to move away to work. And that was something that I talked to quite a lot of people about. So I was thinking really about how that related to the expectations on people in the UK as well, but also my own experience of having been a kinship carer. I've done a lot of presenting at conferences, which has been really interesting, but particularly for me, I've presented other pieces of my work at conferences, but when talking about kinship care, a lot of it is about raising the profile of kinship care and helping people understand that it is really common across our society and doesn't get the same kind of attention as adoption and fostering does. And then I've been supporting and encouraging other researchers who work with children who are looked after, but have never necessarily included kinship children. I think sometimes there's a belief that just because a child is with a family member, then they don't experience the same sort of difficulties and trauma and kind of uncertainty and life changes that children who go into non-related foster care do. Whereas actually when I speak to children who've grown up in kinship care and also kinship carers, they tell me that actually the children have the same needs, they just don't get the same kind of support. And they're quite often dismissed. It's almost like, okay, well, you don't have your mother, but you've got your grandparents. So, it's kind of the same, which is, I think when people really think about that and interrogate it, that's clearly not the case. And then I've done some work around kind of tried to influence policy and practice. At the minute, it's been a little bit limited just because of COVID, but also the independent review of children's social care happened during this period. So although that, there are areas that people feel weren't covered as strongly in that, there was a really big focus on kinship care. So I engaged with that as much as possible and supported other people to engage with that review. And I'm now working with the charity Kinship, which was launched by a previous Churchill Fellow, to launch a national campaign for financial support for kinship carers, no matter what their legal status. So we'll be going to Parliament in a couple of weeks to launch that. So that's quite exciting. I've already had the chance to talk to my MP and a couple of other MPs about that. I've been taking lots of opportunities to present to different groups about kinship care. And to local councillors and MPs. I saw Andrew stuck his hand up there. Okay, no worries. And then also just general kind of work in the community and voluntary work. So I speak with a lot of kinship carers anyway through my work, but in my day-to-day life. So I've done a lot of work kind of doing some outreach within my local community and beyond to raise the profile of kinship care and help people understand what their rights are. And I'm doing some work with Kinship at the minute to help expand the network of peer support groups across England in particular. So thinking about not just the traditional in-person support groups that mainly grandparents and retired people go to, but how we can use online support groups, how we can target support groups to carers such as male carers or sibling carers that haven't traditionally always gone along to get that kind of peer support. So I'm going to leave it there. I think that was a little bit over 5 minutes, unfortunately. But I'm going to pass back to Ellie, and then hopefully we can have some questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Lorna. Jadwiga, would you like to take it away?
Hi, thank you, Lorna. I haven't got any slides. I'm just going to talk. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, good. So I was a 2019 fellow, like Lorna, on the same day we interviewed actually, which was really lovely. And I'm just going to give a bit of background to why I applied, where I was at that time, and my journey during the fellowship and afterwards, and what we've been doing with the findings of the fellowship ever since. So I'd started a community project in 2018 when I was still working at university. So like Lorna, I'm an academic, but I'd started a community project from the research that I'd been conducting as an academic. And the community project was called New Beginnings, and we were working with families in the child protection process. We'd only run one cohort, so it was a pilot project with families when I applied for the Winston Churchill Fellowship. And it had gone reasonably well, but I'd recognised that we needed to do more and that I needed to know more and learn more, especially when it came to identity. So my question was, when I was thinking about the Winston Churchill Fellowship, how could we, as in New Beginnings, better reach people who have experienced significant trauma more effectively? I was aware that in 2008, Kevin Rudd, the then Prime Minister in Australia, had made a national apology to the Australian Indigenous people. And that apology led to a recognition that the stolen generations had been treated unfairly for a long period of time. So I was really curious about how a country that had previously been in denial of the damage it had inflicted on its Indigenous people responded to that apology and how they were going to repair the ruptures that they'd incurred. And that's what my fellowship wanted to do, is go and speak to different organisations to see how they worked with people who'd experienced significant trauma. So the summer of 2019, that's what I did. And I travelled all the way around Australia, speaking to lots of different people, Indigenous people and people that worked with Indigenous people, to learn how we could change our practice back in the UK. And what I basically learned was that the art of narrative therapy was crucial to meaningfully listen to the stories of people who've been affected and experienced significant trauma. And that was something that we were doing in New Beginnings, but probably not in the same way. And there are different arts that organisations and people were using to elicit stories that were really powerful. So taking back my learning, I returned to the UK and I left my academic post and I moved to the community project full time. I wrote an article about my travels called Life After the National Apology. And then I started thinking about what we could do in our service to better listen to the families that we were working with. And that included doing life story work with our families and finding out what they had encountered from being children. Many had often been in the child protection system themselves, but also been affected by intergenerational trauma. And other tools that we could use that also listen to stories of parents and children in interaction, one of them being video interaction guidance, and another being the dynamic maturational model that looks at attachment and history of parents in childhood. So since then, we've actually worked with in total 79 families. So when I'd applied for this fellowship, we'd only worked with 5, and now we've worked with 79. We're currently working with 12, so make that 82, and we're about to recruit another 20. What we've also learned is that you can't close the door after you've started working with families. The door needs to stay open. And that's something that's very powerful, is that families who stay with us, who complete the program, train to become peer mentors and come back and share their learning with the new parents that join our program. So although we've worked with a total of 82 families, the families don't leave, they stay. We don't shut the door is always open, and we're always there to support. And they're a big part of the work that we do. So we are one big family. Through all that learning, we've learned that a large number of our families have hidden disability, learning needs that weren't identified in school, nor by their social workers or professionals. 60% of our families identified a learning need after being with us. They were too ashamed to say they couldn't read the child protection reports that they were given because they were embarrassed and they didn't want to show that they weren't capable of being a parent. So that led to me then applying for further funding from the Winston Churchill Fellowship, Activate funding, so that we can change our resources to be more accessible for the families that we work with. So we can actually, make our service more open and more inclusive, but also that parents feel less marginalised and less stigmatised because of their learning need. And that money is going to help us change our workbook that accompanies our programme into a digital resource that all parents can access. And that is where we are today. And really happy. Best thing I've probably done is apply for the Winston Churchill Fellowship, and I would really encourage all of you to do it, to see what you can learn on your travels.
Thanks very much, Jadwiga. That's great. What a one-liner to finish your section on. Thank you so much. So I will, if that's okay, move on to some questions. We've got one in the Q&A. If you've got any questions, please do add them to the Q&A or to the chat so we can see them. The very first question we have is, how did you both go about discovering the countries that were useful for you to visit during your research? So Lorna, do you want to start? And then we'll see if Jadwiga's answer is any different.
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's really difficult. I really did struggle with it because I really wanted to explore countries that had a very different culture from the UK. And it was something I did in conversation with a lot of people. So a lot of people suggested places in the US and Europe and kind of Australasia that had projects set up. But I was really keen to kind of move outside of similar systems. So as a researcher, I've done a lot of work where we we kind of look at interventions that are in similar contexts, and we kind of we draw learning from there, but then we kind of exclude anything that isn't in English language, that isn't in a similar system. So I sort of had to start from scratch. So a lot of Googling, a lot of kind of, as a kind of researcher, I kind of knew to reach out to like different research departments and things like that. So I did that as a starting point. So I got in touch with universities that had social work departments and asked them if anyone did kinship care research, if they knew of any community projects that it would be useful to get in touch with, if they knew of any particular kind of activists or policymakers in that area that they could connect me with. So I kind of went through that route. So I kind of went, where's got a social work department, and then kind of who's doing work around kinship care. And then really a lot of it as well is just reading, reading kind of news articles, kind of reading kind of academic papers. I mean, for people who aren't researchers, like Google Scholar is really helpful. So literally just going on Google Scholar, there's some like reports. So there's some big charities that do kind of international kind of children focused research, and they are a really good place to start in terms of getting summaries of kind of what's going on in different countries. So yeah, NGOs, those kind of reports, kind of the UNICEF reports as well, are a really good place to start.
Excellent, thank you. And Jadwiga, was your process any different, or was it very similar?
Well, I knew I wanted to go to Australia, and that's because I knew that America was actually more advanced in working with families who had experienced significant trauma. I'd been following Karen Treisman's work on Twitter, and she'd received a Churchill Fellowship the year before, I think. And I knew that that would be the right direction to go, but I wanted to see what a country that was in transition was doing as a service, or obviously a national service, or different services with the people that it was working with. And I knew that narrative therapy was key. I just didn't know how it could be used in different ways. And I'd heard that there were different ways of using it. And it's true, there are lots of different ways of using it. I think my biggest problem was reaching organizations. They're very, very busy. They don't always reply to your emails when you send them. And what's great is that when you get a fellowship, Winston Churchill Fellowship people give you kind of lots of templates to use that you can help connect with people. And they also help you link with previous fellows from different countries around the world. And that was a great springboard for me. And then, like Lorna said, Google, what would we do without Google? And it takes time for people to reply, but when they do, it's about making sure that you can fit in with their plans. And then I found that when I got there, people would introduce me to other organizations, because then once they meet you and they see you and they realize that you have, good intentions, they're then more willing to help you make those connections. So it went really smoothly. And in fact, I was really busy the whole way around. So yeah, start small, grow big.
Excellent. I think actually, Jadwiga, that very nicely leads me on to the next question, which I'm going to break down partly for you guys and partly for Nikesh. So how many connections did you have? How much investigation did you do before you made your application, and how much of it came in the development afterwards? Jadwiga, would you like to take that, since you nicely segued into it?
Well, the application does want a plan, and it wants an overview, because obviously they need to know that you've done some planning. They do say in the application that it's not necessary that you get confirmation from the places that you're going to. But I wanted to check that if I was going to get this right, that the place that I wanted to go was going to receive me. So I did make some tentative connections prior to submitting the application. And I think that really helped me formulate the plan. What was I actually going to do? It helped me with my question. It helped me with my aims and my objectives. Of course, that plan changed, and that's okay. The fellowship was really supportive in that happening. But I would say do your research and get an understanding of where you want to go and how it's going to help. And then that will help you complete your application form. I don't know if Lorna did it any differently.
I was going to say, I probably was slightly less organised than you yet. Well, I guess I tried to be as organised, but actually when I was communicating with people whose first language wasn't English, it was a little bit harder to be clear about what the fellowship was and what I was asking. So what I tried to do is kind of reach out to a couple of people, not necessarily to kind of make arrangements, but to kind of say, this is what I'm interested in. Are there things that you think that it would be interesting for me to look at, if that makes sense? So it kind of helped me frame what it was I was going to do and exactly what I was going to focus on, rather than having kind of quite firm kind of contacts in terms of places I was going to go to, because I felt I'd done a fair amount of traveling before, so I felt reasonably confident that I would be able to kind of navigate my way. But actually, it took quite a lot of work to kind of explain exactly what the fellowship was and why. And a lot of people, it was really interesting actually, because particularly in India, a lot of people, I think, have actually in Japan as well, have had the experience of people going to research them to almost like critique what they're doing. And I had to do a lot of work to explain that was in fact the opposite of what I wanted to do. And actually I wanted to learn from what they were doing. And I had to do that in person when I was there. And once I was there, people were really open to sharing and showing me around. But I would say I had some ideas and I had spoken to a couple of people, but I didn't have kind of really firm kind of commitments from organizations, other than in Cambodia, which is where I didn't end up going in the end, and the organization closed down during COVID. So I think you're completely right in terms of flexibility, but also doing your research and having that balance.
Fantastic, thank you. I guess I have one more question for you. How did you find the support during your fellowship process, during your actual travel and research phases? Lorna, would you like to take that one first?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. It's really, really helpful to know that you can literally just email someone. Like, so for example, I was going somewhere and I realized I was going to need an interpreter, and I hadn't budgeted for it, and I didn't even know how to go about getting an interpreter. So literally all I did was, I think I emailed Nikesh actually and said, I'm going to need an interpreter. What do I do? And it was really, really helpful to just have that response really quickly, have someone say, yeah, that's fine, that's not a problem. This is kind of what we would look for in terms of, who would be a good interpreter, and this is like what a normal budget would be. And it meant that as things came up, I knew there was someone I could ask. I felt very kind of like I was part of something, like I wasn't just off on my own, doing my own thing. So that was really, really helpful. And also, I think like I didn't at any point feel worried that if something changed or something cancelled, or for some reason, I turned up and my hotel didn't exist or something like that, that I wouldn't have someone to turn to. It always felt very safe.
Excellent, that's good to know. Jadwiga?
So I didn't actually need any support when I went on my fellowship, but that doesn't mean that I didn't get it when I came back. And I think it's called a fellowship for a reason. You are part of a collective, and it's really meaningful from the moment that you are granted a fellowship, that you feel quite unique and quite special and looked after, I'd say. Because after we found out we were successful in getting a fellowship, we were invited to a day where we were able to all meet each other with people who were in our kind of area of work, which was lovely. And then you get to put names to faces. And then I went off on my travels. And then when I came back and I wrote my report, that's when I needed the support. And I liked the fact that when I submitted my report, it wasn't just accepted and put up onto the drive. It was read. It was lots of beautiful feedback, but lots of comments as well, where more questions were asked, where more analysis, more depth was required. And I liked that. That meant that there was a relationship with the person that was supporting me on my travels, and also giving me guidance to what I could go on to do next. And that's really beneficial.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Jadwiga. I think we'll do one more question for you guys, if that's okay. I'm going to break down another one. So one of the questions is about how were you supportive to take unpaid leave from your employment, if at all? So are you able to answer that one, Jadwiga?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think that that's what worries everyone. And I remember that being a question when we were applying. I was fortunate in that I'd moved to an organisation at Lancaster University where they said you can go, and they knew that it would be beneficial for the work that I was going to be doing, and also for the university itself. And I did put forward the proposal that I took it unpaid and that I would, not be a burden to the university. They argued the opposite, and they said that actually the learning would be beneficial for everyone. And I think we came to an agreement that when I came back, I would write an article, which I did, and I would do a presentation, which I did, and I'd share those findings with the team. So I was very lucky in that regard.
Thanks, Jadwiga. Lorna?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question because it's something that I struggled with as well. And I've got to say, even though I do have a colleague here, and I'm hoping loads of people from Cascade will apply, I did ask, and I know some people like that I work with kind of really tried to support me with kind of, it not having to be unpaid leave and it fitting into our work, because what I was researching really did fit with our mission. And actually the kind of HR feedback was absolutely not, like, this has to be unpaid leave. And I think that was fine because I was at a bit of a transition point anyway. So I was kind of going to part-time, so I could make it work, but I wanted it to feel like it was part kind of building on my work as well, and it fit in much more clearly. And I think what Yad described would have been perfect for me. So my hope now is that now that I've done a fellowship and my work has seen how beneficial it was, I know they are putting a lot of effort into trying to encourage other people who work in this area and support me to encourage other people to apply. And I think a little bit of it is that it wasn't necessary. Most people didn't necessarily know what the fellowship was. And because there's now a theme around children's social care specifically, actually, most of the people that I work with are very aware that this is going on now. So I think you could make a much stronger case for it. Whereas when I applied, I had to apply as like other, and it didn't necessarily fit like on paper with my work. So I couldn't make as strong a case. And whereas now I'm sure I would be able to.
Thanks, Lorna. That's really interesting. I think thank you for your questions, everybody. Some of the other questions are more about the application process and what the fellowship can offer as an organisation. So if Nikesh is ready, I will pass on to him to give a bit of an overview of the application process.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nikesh. I'm the Fellowship Manager here at the Churchill Fellowship. I'm going to talk briefly about the support that we offer during the application stage of the fellowship, as well as throughout the research stage, if you are awarded a fellowship. As you already know, our applications are now open and will remain open until the 22nd of November at 5 p.m. For the first time this year, we're running a hybrid fellowship model, where applicants can choose either a travel option, an online approach, or a hybrid or mixture of both. The feedback from our fellows has shown that the online approach increases the accessibility for gaining global knowledge in a vast array of countries when compared to traditional travel. And so we felt that it was important to offer this to prospective fellows. The application form itself is located online, and every question on our application form has descriptive detail in brackets so that the applicant knows what type of information to include in each question. The application form also has a save feature in case you need to take a break or mull over any of the questions and come back to it at a different day to complete the application itself. We are a very open funder, and so if for any reason you cannot complete the application form or you're having any trouble, we're more than happy to receive an email or a phone call with any questions or concerns that you may have, and we'll always strive to offer the support necessary to rectify any of your queries or issues. And we're also welcome to hearing from our applicants regarding our application form, as we're always looking at ways to improve our access to the fellowship programme itself. We do treat applicants on a case-by-case basis, and we always aim to treat them as individuals, as every applicant has a unique project and they're very passionate about. Our commitment to diversity and equality means that we have fellows from all walks of life, spanning from across the United Kingdom, and so we do highly encourage you to apply if you do have a passion project for the betterment of your communities within the UK. If your initial application is successful, you will have the chance to provide more detail in a follow-up shortlist form. And we understand that plans and research evolve over time, so please do communicate that to us when necessary, as we're very open to hearing your thoughts and suggestions, as well as providing any help with the shortlisting form where possible. If you are successful at this stage, you'll be offered a chance at an interview where you can get to meet us face to face to discuss your project more openly. If you do require somebody to support you throughout your interview, we are more than happy for you to bring them along to sit in on the interview with yourself. Additionally, if you have any accessibility requirements, we will of course do our best to accommodate them throughout the process. If you are then awarded a fellowship after the interview stage, you'll be invited to a new fellows seminar where you will get a chance to meet the staff team as well as your fellow cohort. A fellowship handbook will also be provided to you, which contains a lot, and I mean a lot, of necessary information to conduct a successful and fulfilling fellowship. So that's talking about the application stage a little bit. Now, during the research stage of the fellowship, we also provide tailored support with the construction of your travel itinerary to ensure that your research trips are both feasible and knowledgeable for you. To this end, when booking travel, the Churchill Fellowship partners with a travel agent who can provide advice and support when booking travel to ensure the most cost-effective and eco-friendly modes of travel for all of our fellows. We also provide travel advice to you for the countries that you're intending to visit so that you feel supported throughout the process of booking travel and then eventually traveling. Additionally, we would insure you, and we insure all of our fellows for their research trips once your travel has been planned. We're also able to accommodate into your grant budget the travel costs, accommodation and living expenses for a support worker to accompany you on your research trip should you require this. It is important to outline the requirement of a support worker or a travelling companion in your application and shortlist form, so we can factor this into the budget. In case of any emergencies while on your research trip, there will be emergency contact information provided to you for our insurers, our travel agent, and the Churchill Fellowship team itself, so you feel safe and supported in case anything arises while on your trip. So these are the levels of support that we currently offer during the application and research stages of the fellowship. We do find that lots of our fellows do access support from peer groups or through their employers externally to us. It is important to note that once you are awarded a Churchill Fellowship, you are a Churchill Fellow for life. So that means participation in events, joining our mobilised network to exchange ideas and information, and receiving our newsletters with other funding opportunities. As a small organisation, we do aim to make each individual applicant and fellow feel welcome, supported and appreciated throughout their interaction with us. Lastly, we work with a range of different partners across multiple themes. And for this children and young people with experience of care theme, we're really happy to have partnered with Coram. We have Andrew Dickey here from Coram Voice, who's the head of services, and he will speak to you today. But before I pass over to Andrew, I'll open to any questions that you may have for me.
Yes, if anyone else has any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. But until then, Nikesh, how about a question or not that came up a little bit earlier as well, about the support from the break in income. Are we able to offer any support that way?
So we don't offer any financial support to cover income for our fellowships, either online or through our travel or hybrid fellowships. We pay for the accommodation, the living costs, and we can pay for other miscellaneous payments, such as we can cover some childcare costs, we can cover visas, we can cover any medical injections or things that you need for traveling to, in addition to the original grant, as well as interpreters, which is important for countries that don't speak English.
Thanks, Nikesh. And we'll also go back to the question that we had a little bit earlier about how much planning do you need to have done before your application? How many concrete connections do you have to have made? How important is that?
So we don't need you to have any confirmed meetings, nothing like that, especially at the application stage. We just would like to see that you've thought about who you would like to meet with, the types of organizations you would like to visit, and along those lines. So we definitely don't expect any concrete confirmations of meetings or anything along those lines.
Great. Perhaps bring Sian in on this too, who is our fellowship director. One of the questions earlier on was about budgets and what is there a guidance on the kind of budget you need to apply for? Do you need to have made that whole plan before you apply? And also if there's support available to take your child with you on your fellowship, if that's something you need to do.
You don't need to have worked out your full budget at the initial application stage. So at that point, we are trying to understand the type of research you're wanting to undertake and why you're trying to undertake it. If, as Nikesh was saying, you are shortlisted to go forward from the initial application, then at that point, you would be asked to submit a shortlist form. And at that point, we would ask you to submit more detail about the expected costs. And we will be providing updated guidance to help you do that. And then in terms of the question around childcare and taking a child with you, if you need to travel for your fellowship, I'm afraid that's something that we're not able to support. So we are able, obviously, if you were sharing a hotel room, then that is a type of support, but we aren't actually able to cover the costs of travel, for example, for a child. Thanks, Ellie.
Thanks, Sian. Nikesh, can you tell us the kind of average length of a fellowship and how much time people spend on their fellowships?
So I think the average length of a fellowship is between 5 and 6 weeks. You can travel from a minimum of 4 weeks to a maximum of 8 weeks. So it's completely up to the individual and how many places you want to visit, how many organizations you want to speak to determine your length of your fellowship. But the average is about 5 to 6 weeks, and most of our fellows undertake it in one phase, but it is possible to undertake it in 2 phases if you need to, due to work commitments, personal commitments, etc.
Thanks very much. Unless there's any more questions coming in from our attendees, which I can't see at the moment, I'll ask one more question, which is, have you got one top tip for an application?
One top tip, I would say make the application as clear and concise as possible. I think most of our questions have big paragraph boxes to type answers into, so making your points come across clear and concise is probably the best tip I can give.
Thank you, Nikesh. We don't have any questions coming in at the moment, so perhaps we'll get some more over the next few minutes, but I think we can pass to Andrew.
That's great. Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, just to introduce myself, I'm Andrew Dickey. I'm head of services at Coram Voice. So we're Coram and Coram Voice are delighted to be supporting the Churchill Fellowship theme on children and young people with the experience of care. Coram as a group as a charity been working with children for over 275 years. We do a wide range of services from adoption to therapeutic services, legal services, drama, life education in schools. And a lot of that work is focused on children and young people in contact with the care system, and particularly within Coram Voice, where I work. I lead on our advocacy and children's rights services. And again, that's all with children, young people from birth up to 25 who are in care, leaving care, or on the edges of the children's social care system. So that could be children in need or asylum-seeking children whose age is disputed. At a personal level, I've been working in the human rights and children's rights sector for about 20 years. I've done worked with refugee legal charities, and worked in volunteered with human rights organizations in the Middle East and Asia. And so during that time, I had to look after my well-being and supported people in my teams and services to do likewise. And I want to stress, I'm not an expert in this field, but I did want to share some thoughts about self-care and well-being, and also some of the ideas that Coram has about the support we may be able to offer Churchill Fellows who are looking at this really important theme of children and young people with experience of care. So I think looking at making the application is clearly going to be something that's going to be hugely competitive. It's clearly a fantastic opportunity, and I think we've seen that from Jadwe and Lorna. It's a great opportunity. There's lots of talented people will be wanting to take it up. So that's one of the things I wanted to perhaps suggest is to look at the application process as not as a case of success or failure. There'll be great applicants who make great applications who won't be offered a fellowship because there's only a small number of places. So I think it might be helpful to look at a strong application as an opportunity in itself. It's an opportunity to reflect and articulate about your ambitions, about the changes you want to see made. I think it's an opportunity to reflect on and again articulate your skills and capacities and think about how you can use those to lead change. So clearly it's going to be a disappointment if you're not successful at the shortlisting or the final stage. But I know certainly from personal experience and from colleagues that having that thought process of doing that research can leave you much better equipped if you're looking at other opportunities for research or even employment or even looking at a future fellowship. Obviously, some of you will be accepted onto the fellowship, and I really look forward to hearing about what those research topics are and outcomes of those. And some of you may have any form of lived experience of involvement or contact with the children's social care system. And I think having that lived experience is hugely positive. It can be a really powerful resource. It can give you unique insights and understanding. I think it's also important to recognize that whenever we do research or study or work in an area where we have personal links, then it may bring a focus on past experiences, and sometimes that can be challenging. So it's a good idea to consider how you'll manage that as you embark upon that on the fellowship. It'll bring pressures and anxieties, I've no doubt, as deadlines approach and trying to put meetings in place and all sorts of the aspects of the research planning and going about the research. So it's important to think about what tools you'll use and what support you have access to manage that. So it's about thinking about who can help you out, who can listen to you, act as a sounding board, or offer advice. And of course, that can be friends or family or colleagues and peers. But also, I think it's been mentioned, you can also look to the fellowship as well. I think there's a community there to be looking for support. And I think the other thing I wanted to stress is that sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves. We've got this opportunity and you want to make the best of it. And I know certainly from the work we've done and the work with care leavers, it's pretty common amongst young people who have had care experience that sort of self-pressure can be even heightened more than it would be in general. So I'd encourage to think about being as open as possible to talk about any challenges you have. It's not a sign of weakness, it's definitely a sign of self-awareness and strength to do that. I think the other thing I wanted to just say was in terms of those who are coming to this with lived experience of the care system, it's important to think about how much you want to share about your personal experiences. It's completely for you to determine that. And I think one of the things we sometimes find is people feel like an obligation to share, and that's simply not the case. You want to be able to think about what you feel comfortable sharing with. So I think the main message for me is that it's clear it's a fantastic opportunity, but it's a good idea to consider any sort of challenges that might be associated with that opportunity. One of the things, as we're looking forward to the fellowship starting, is as an organisation, Coram, we're looking at how we can offer some support to fellows. So an initial suggestion is some form of light touch mentorship. experienced managers from across the Quorum group, a wide range of professional backgrounds. Maybe would be helpful for them to offer professional insights and support to fellows as they go through the process. But we're keen, and I'm sure that the Churchill Fellowship team are also keen to hear from applicants and those who are successful about what more we could do to support your well-being on what is going to be an exciting journey. So yeah, please do. You can share your thoughts now or as things progress through the application and the fellowship itself. So thanks for your time, and I very much want to wish you good luck with your application and the research that goes beyond that.
Thanks very much, Andrew. That's really, really helpful. It's really good to hear from Quorum as our partners. Do we have another questions come in? Wonderful. Sean, I think this is for you. If you're able to answer this one. So will you be looking to accept applications from researchers who do not have a lived experience of care?
Yes, we welcome applications from both people who do have lived experience of care, but also people who don't, but who are working on this theme, have an interesting research topic for this theme.
Excellent, thank you very much. We've also got a question asking, is there support in place with things like proofreading for those people who perhaps have had low educational outcomes and low standard educational outcomes, traditional education?
Is that proofreading applications or final reports?
The question doesn't specify, so that's up to you. I think you could cover both perhaps.
Okay. So currently we're not able to offer proofreading of applications. What we do offer, as Nikesh mentioned earlier, is that the application form can be saved so that you can fill it out and then come back to it later in order to make sure that you're happy with it. If needed, we can also send an offline version that you can fill out, finesse, and then you can copy and paste into your online application form, which we hope is helpful. When people have completed their research phase, then we do ask them to submit a report, and that is to help us publicise the research that has been carried out. It can be carried out in a variety of different ways. It can be a written report, but we've also had people who have done blogs. We've had one fellow who did a TEDx talk. So we've had all different kinds of reports. If people do submit a written report, then we do offer feedback on that.
Thanks, Sean. I think I'd just like to open up the floor for any more questions, either through the chat or the Q&A feature. I don't think we have any at the moment. Sean, do you have a different top tip for any of our potential applicants?
My top tip would be to be yourself, because as all the panelists have said, there is no typical Churchill Fellow. We very much are interested in supporting all types of different people from different backgrounds with different areas of interest to bring into the fellowship. So we really want to hear from you. Don't feel like you have to tick our boxes, be yourself.
Excellent, thank you. We don't currently have any more questions, and I think that's actually a really good way to finish the session, being yourself. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Lorna and Jadwiga, who's had to rush off. Thank you very much for your time and sharing your experience with us today. Thank you also to Andrew for coming along. We really appreciate Quorum as our partners on this. As I've said before, the recording will be available on the website along with the live transcript. And if you have any further questions, things pop into your head in the next few days, please do email us at office@churchillfellowship.org. And yes, thank you and have a good rest of your day.